I was, like so many, a very disruptive child. I think I would have been diagnosed with what they call ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. In other words, I found it very difficult to concentrate, to be sort of quietly on my own. I was constantly interrupting and making a nuisance of myself and feeling not part of the general run of school life. I always felt different. And I used to climb the school buildings and look down on everyone from the roof and get into all kinds of mischief and steal things. And I stole from shops, I stole from cloakrooms and all kinds of places. It was a compulsion. It was a weird thing. And I got expelled from one school and then from another, and then ran away from a third and went to London. I was 17. I got into a pub and it was quite cold, so I lifted a coat from a coat hanger, and in the coat was a wallet, and it had 2 credit cards in it. Now, this was long enough ago. I guess we're talking 75, something like that. No, but yeah, about around there, 75, 76, however old 17, yeah, must have been. And in those days, credit cards didn't have a magnetic strip. You couldn't connect them. You just rolled them over to make a charge. And so they were very insecure. And so I was able to spend many, many weeks going to hotels and living the life of Riley, really, on these credit cards, knowing that I would eventually get caught. Obviously, somehow I must have done. And I did in Swindon. I was... one of the things I hadn't managed to get in my spending spree was a good pair of shoes, because I have very large feet, size 13 feet. And finally in Swindon, I got a good pair of shoes in a shoe shop, said they could keep the old ones, put the new ones on, went back to the hotel where I'd checked in with my credit card. And the girl behind the desk saw me come in with the new shoes and remembered that I'd had terrible shoes. And she thought, he's a young fellow and he's just changed his shoes like that. And anyway, she thought, I wonder about this card. So she took the imprint from it that she had taken, which was the only security they did, and she called up MasterCard, as they were called, Access, as they were called in those days, the earlier name for MasterCard, I think, and discovered it was stolen. And anyway, police came to the room. I was taken across the road to the Wiltshire Constabulary in Swindon. And to cut a long story short, I was put on remand while paperwork caught up with me. So I spent about 3 months in this youth detention center. Well, it wasn't a detention center exactly. It was a remand center for youth. It was called Puckle Church, which is such a cute name, isn't it? It sounds like a little cottage with roses running around the door.
I think it's probably too cute now, because I think they've renamed it Ashfield, which
they have, yeah. It
doesn't have the same ring to it.
It had riots in it a few years ago and was not a happy place. And I can understand why. I mean, I was probably luckier than many of the other young men there, because I'd been to boarding school from the age of 7. So I was incredibly used to an institutional life of slamming doors and yelling people in authority and being told to go there and being away from home. But a lot of the boys, and some of them were boys, they were 16, 17, 18 years old, up to about 20, I think. Some of them were deeply, they just missed home. They were really unhappy. And I found I fitted in pretty well, to be honest. The work was light. That it was you were either on duty polishing the floors of the various wings, or you were painting little plastic soldiers with paint. It was a weird thing, and I was perfectly cheerful, to be honest. I was ashamed.
Can I just let me just say, you say you were perfectly cheerful and you were kind of, your words, kind of almost semi-institutionalized because of boarding school, etc.
Yeah.
But there must have been that moment. There must have been that moment where you were taken down to the cells, having, I know at first you weren't convicted.
Yeah.
You just thought to yourself, okay, I know I was on a bit of a self-destruct mission. I knew what I was doing in the West Country. I knew I was going to get caught eventually. Geez, like, here I am.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I think
that cold realization
Yeah, you're right. When I say I was cheerful, I was going to come on to the fact that really I discovered that it was all front. It was all me just pretending things were fine. And also because I didn't want to show the other inmates that I was afraid. Because I sort of sensed that there was bullying. Of course, there was. There was, there were some weak kids who just couldn't hack it and were treated abominably by other inmates, and I just wanted to look as if I knew what I was doing. But inside, I was terrified. I was terrified that I had made choices along my life that meant I'd gone to a place that I couldn't escape from. That there was no way back into the world for me. I was lucky in as much as I was obsessed with reading and books and ideas and thinking and so on. So I kind of made a vow to myself that if I did get out without a proper prison sentence and I was able to get home, I would, whatever it took, I would find some way of taking exams and getting to university, which I felt I could do. There were examples around me of bright young men who had never had opportunities I'd had. And I was aware that really I was, so lucky in life to have parents who were pretty well off and who had sent me to these private schools and who would accept me back, although they'd be upset and they'd definitely want me.
But you had that support.
That I had a kind of support from. And there was a Welsh boy there whom I started to teach to read and write, which was incredibly exciting to watch him kind of get a grip on writing and reading, which was thrilling. And yeah,
and you played a part in that. I mean, the professor. We're not talking Netflix's.
Yes, my nickname was Professor. That's absolutely right. People, I stuck out like a sore thumb. I was very tall, obviously, so I literally stuck out, but also because my accent and my way of behaving and the things I said was so unlike what everyone else said. Most of the young men there were from the West Country and Wales or from Wormwood Scrubs overspill. They had been tocking and TDA were the most common crimes, taking without earnest consent and taking and driving away. I never quite knew what the difference between those were. And so there was that mixture, the rather savvy London ones who kind of knew what it was all about, and the ones from the valleys, and the ones from like Bristol and so forgive the accents, but you know what I mean. So it was a strange, and everyone was terrified of detention centre because most of us were on remand and we were either we're going to go up to appear in court. If you hadn't pleaded, you were a non-con and you wore, as I remember it, a brownish uniform and you didn't have to work and people could bring you things that you could keep in your cell. But the moment you then pled, and if you said guilty, you were a con and you were in grey and you had to work. And that's what happened to me after a few weeks. I appeared in front of court. The police said they still needed to catch up with the paperwork, and I was a con. And that's when I decided that when I got out, I would toe the line, and that I didn't want to waste what I saw as my potential, I suppose.
Can I just take you back again to the first few days? And it won't come as a surprise to you, I'm sure, that during the Christmas period, prisons fill up quite substantially. Your initial impressions of prison staff, the facilities.
Staff, the screws were... I mean, it's a bit like porridge in the sense there's one nice one that you immediately find, the Mr. Barraclough kind. Now, come along, Fletcher. That sort, really a kind of one you can twist around your little finger almost, and you can chat with. And a few that were just bastards, that were just mean, that liked to exercise power and liked to show that they were free and you weren't, and that you were scum, and they were, they really emphasized how low they thought of us, and they were hated, obviously. And in a strange way, it is a peculiarity of the human spirit, is we almost thrive off this hierarchy and this sense of people above us we hate, because it forms a bond with us. And the unfairness. It's a strange thing, isn't it, that people who've committed crimes and often not been able to distinguish between their own property and other people's property, nonetheless, you never lose that human sense of what's just and fair. And you can't bear it when, that they play with these privileges they can give you. The most obvious one being association. There's an association hall room, with a ping pong table and a television and all that sort of thing. And so in the evening, that's your great treat. And the pleasure with which some of those screws say, "You, Fry, off association," and you're kind of like, and you just feel that's so unfair because he heard someone saying something or whatever and thought it was me and it wasn't, but I can't squeal and say it was him, not me, because that's another rule that I'd break, so you'd fester. What happens in institution is small things become big.
Yeah.
Little injustices, little moments, little petty enmities and feuds become huge because they're all you have in a way, and so they make room for the space in your head that usually deals with bigger issues. It deals with the smaller ones, and that can be very difficult. And of course, there was no thought of mental health and what that did to people. They're being wrenched from their parents, a history of many of them, of course, of abuse and, all kinds of issues of unhappiness and parental problems and, just feelings that were exacerbated by the experience of being banged up and could lead to psychotic episodes or to suicide attempts and all the problems that we know afflict those on the inside. That now one hopes these things are more recognized.
Sure, absolutely.
But I think what we're recognizing is the seriousness of it. And, you wouldn't allow open sewers to run through prisons that caused cholera and other diseases, but there are mental equivalents of that are as certain or as likely to cause mental health problems as an open sewer is likely to cause a physical problem with typhus or cholera or whatever. Do you see what I mean? I mean,
absolutely.
And I think part of having a humane system, because there's so much one could talk about in terms of the futility and the lack of fitness for purpose that our penal system has, but amongst the calls for a more humane way of taking people out of society so they can readjust and recalibrate and maybe set themselves on a path to a life that doesn't involve the problems that have got them there. One of the most important things is clearly to have a real sense of how people can thrive better in the company of others without the pressure that can build to mental health problems.
Can I ask you, I completely agree and well said. At the heart of Wayout TV, in our DNA, we're about education and learning. Okay.
Yeah.
But the very least we should do is provide brain food for thought, some form of escapism. I've got anything wrong with daytime TV. I want to pass life putting some of that to air. But nonetheless, atoning for my sins, Wayout TV should be about education, learning, and brain food. Did you take advantage of any of the learning facilities, any of the educational facilities at Buckle Church when you were there?
I mean, I did. I was pretty advanced, really, because I'd read all my life, so I was familiar with the novels and literature of my own, culture and country, British English literature, but also American and German and Russian and French books and things. And I was quite precocious. But I think the thing that it doesn't. I was good at that, but I was bad at so many other things. And I think one of the key things everyone has to recognize is that most of us are afraid of something that looks like it's closed off to us, that there's a membrane we can't penetrate, that things are for other people, that at some point in our lives, education, books, talking in that poncy way is for other people, it's not for me. And there are plenty of people who love books or science who feel that about sport, that at some point when they were young and shivering and they were not picked for the team, and suddenly everybody's talking about the manager of Man City is doing this and these names, and you think it's too late for me. I'm not a sporty person and I'll never be part of that world, and human life is made up of these bubbles of interest that people have, that they're very passionate inside them, and to them it's easy. Oh, it's easy. What's your problem? It's easy to read books and talk about them. That's all you've got to do. Or it's easy to learn a new technique with numbers, to do a quadratic equation or something. And
what was that?
Exactly. And it's so easy to feel excluded. And it's also easy to feel patronized. So the difficulty is, how do you say to people, you are welcome, and let's have fun. Let's find a way that you can enjoy new skills, new ideas, things that will light little flames in you and make you feel part of it all. But let's not do it by patting your head and making you feel like a child again. Let's respect who you are and find that way. And that takes immense skill from teachers. It can't be done by an AI or a computer program yet, at least. It can only be done by someone who gets it, who understands. Ideally, someone else who's been on the inside or who is actually in with you, but who has that skill, because then you trust them more. They're not
sort of a peer mentoring program.
Yeah, that's right. And everybody can teach somebody something and can help them out. And one of the great discoveries in life is how the act of helping other people is so helpful to oneself. It makes one glow with pleasure. It's a cliche, and of course all people on the inside know, Shawshank Redemption. But that inside that movie, which is obviously one of the most popular movies ever made, that there are these quite good stories of the young the young guy who comes into the story quite late, who ends up getting shot. Of course, it's awful. But he's, Tim Robbins's character, Andy Dufresne, teaches him for an exam. And it's a very touching moment. And he builds the library up and everything. And it's really about the freedom and the self-respect that the prisoners of Shawshank got through just kind of not beating the system exactly, but getting their library. It was theirs. It was their. It was it didn't belong to that group of outsiders who are the probation officers and the magistrates and all those people who doubtless try to do their best, but they're not us. And I think that's one of the keys where possible, is to try and find that mentoring. And once it's started, one hopes it becomes like a virtuous circle, so that it feeds off itself and gets bigger and bigger, because there are more people who can then pass on what they've learned.
Really gathers momentum with integrity.
Yeah, like a snowball, exactly. It just gets bigger.
Absolutely. We're coming to the end of this interview, but I have to ask you a couple of questions. Not least of all, and I've asked this of a few people who have taken part in this Christmas special. I've taught a lot of people in prisons, and some really quite tough guys. They're from London, and they're very out there in the classroom.
Yeah,
I've noticed that towards the end of their sentence, these very big, muscular, very vocal individuals become very quiet, very withdrawn, because they're actually terrified. I don't think it's too strong a word. Of actually, they're about to be released. They're going to have £75 in their pocket, back to their old haunts, back to their old mates. The light bulb's gone on. They've learned something. They've understood something about themselves. They've made sense of this. And now is it all going to start again? How did you feel? I mean, your circumstance is slightly different, I know, but how did you feel about re-entering, as it were, the outside world, having perhaps maybe what you considered a stigma attached to it?
You're absolutely right. It's a real problem, and one of the things that frightened me was that if I got detention centre, which was the famous short, sharp shock that was given to young people, which was all about standing up when you eat and just exercising all the time, you end up being physically fit, and the only job you're likely to get is a bouncer in the nightclub or something, and there someone's is going to try and cut in the queue and will offer you a gram of coke as payment to get through into the thing, or someone else, or you're going to overreact and accidentally hit someone too hard, and because you've got a record, it will go against you, and you're sucked into exactly the kind of circumstances you didn't want to. And the world will be different when you get out as well. There will be new things that you're not quite sure of. And in case of people who've done a long stretch, then, you know, the internet and technology and QR codes and all that, it just suddenly the world belongs to someone else, not to you. It is a very disturbing thing. And the thought that if people know that you've done time, that, you know, you're a convict, that there is terrible stigma about it, and the only people who don't care are the kind of people who are likely to get you into trouble again. It's a real problem, and I don't think enough is done to prepare people for life on the outside and for the adjustment. I mean, there's a friend of mine, she does extraordinary work with women prisoners, which sounds like kind of a weird idea, which is coming in with clothes to talk about how they're going to dress when they go on the outside, right, about what's fashionable and what you feel you look good in. And I know it's a sexist thing. It's suggesting women care more about their appearance than men do or whatever. But there is a culture, a female culture about dress and appearance that is very strong. And it does enormous good to these women to look at themselves in a mirror and feel they can perk themselves up. And there isn't quite an equivalent for men. You know, you're not going to get men saying, at least it's less likely. But if there is an equivalent, something that will just, you know, and I'm not sure what it is, but something that allows people to feel that the world they're entering when they get outside the prison gates, you know, is not the cliche of the fellow in an old style suit with a brown paper parcel in his hand having to get on a bus, you know, and just being, whoa, what is this? The bus doesn't take money anymore. I'm supposed to have something called an Oyster card. What the hell's that? You know, all of these issues. I don't know. I suppose, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, but there should be people who care about the penal system and who care about people who've gone through it, coming and helping more in prisons. I know there's the Howard League, and there are all kinds of terrific institutions like your own, Wayout, which is just fantastic. And I guess maybe there should be a big push to get people to come in and help where they can with that.
I think you're absolutely right, because it is, I think, leaving through the gate, you obviously have to have the skills, the toolbox to be able to get the work. But it's also about self-esteem and confidence. That's
so much so. Yeah.
You say about presentation and just being able to walk taller.
Yeah, because sometimes the real problem is you're a big guy in school. Yeah. You know, you're quite popular. Yeah. No one's going to mess with you. You've got status because you've done quite a long stretch, maybe a long piece of birth. And so when you get outside, you're that high. You're suddenly nobody. And that's terrible for self-esteem, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Okay. I've got two very quick questions to end on.
Yes.
That's okay. So two pieces of advice. First of all, there's prison staff as well as prisoners watching and listening to this. What would your advice be if you've got one piece of advice or just an ask directed towards them? What would it be?
I think all prison staff, when trained, should be banged up for 2 weeks with senior staff, and who would treat them as they expect. And just so they get a feel of what it's like to be banged up, to stop out, to queue for the showers, to be shouted at, to be, to just get a sense of what it is to be on the other side of it. I think that would be very important, because so much in life is about imagination. It's about imagining what it's like to be someone else. And the moment you can do that, we call it empathy or, imagination, or there are various words for it. But it seems to me it's one of the most important human instincts is rather than just regard everyone as aliens, they're the bad people on that side of the line, I'm the good person on this side of the line, is not a healthy way to be. So I think that's what I would suggest. And obviously, the better paid they are, the better respect they have, the better quality of person is drawn into the profession. And I know there's a real problem at the moment with recruitment. And I don't know what the solution to that is. I think there's been a mess up of institutions that have been privatized, semi-privatized, and still fully in the public and run by the Home Office. It seems a bit of a mess. I think it would be great if there was serious rethink, because there's so much to get right and there's so much wrong with our justice and penal system.
Absolutely. So it's continual improvement, and it has to be. And that fight to progress, and training and education and facilities, about rehabilitation, isn't it? Of course, it's about punishment, but it is about rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question is: so it's a difficult time of the year. Whether you have faith or not, it's just a very lonely time of the year. What piece of advice would you give to those who are perhaps still facing quite a sizable stretch, who are, I don't know, looking for a little bit of inspiration in terms of just the light at the end of the tunnel? We're not talking about a train coming the other way.
Well, I always like this. There's a very good film called Running on Empty, and River Phoenix is in it, and the girl who's sort of falling in love with him is watching him beachcombing. He's on the beach, and she says, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm just looking for something because it's my mum's birthday next week." And she said, "Well, why are you looking on the beach?" She said, "Oh, we have a rule in our family. You're not allowed to give anything to anyone unless you've made it yourself, found it or made it yourself. So we tend to find things and then make them into little sculptures or whatever." And you know, for when Christmas comes, again, it's part of the old cliche: it's better to give than to receive. But you know, to make something for a friend you've got. It could be someone on the outside, but it's very likely to be someone on the inside. You know, you could have a sort of secret Santa club where everybody makes something for someone else, and it doesn't have to be a kind of, you know, poncy little beauty. It could be a stupid thing, a funny thing. It doesn't have to be a piece of art necessarily, but it might be a piece of art. I think that. Again, it's all part of, you know, filling a day and feeling fulfilled is making things. It's a very wonderful human instinct to make something, and it's not easy, but it's fun to try. And I think that's certainly what I would do around Christmas time, because I would get very depressed about not being, you know, around a fire with family and, you know, pulling crackers and things. And so I think, making stuff.
And it's about the act of giving as well, of course. You know, Christmas is about giving rather than just receiving. That act of giving is really powerful.
Yeah, if you watch even children who love, obviously, to get presents, but when the person that you've given a present to has your present on their lap, your eyes are fixed on them. You want to see them open it. You want to see their expression when they pull it out, and you hope it's a kind of, oh, and you go, what do you think? What do you think? And you care so much more about that than you care about what you've been given yourself, because you just want to. I mean, it's a kind of vanity. We want to be admired for our gift giving skills.
Absolutely. Stephen, on that note, thank you for giving up your time for us today on Wayout TV. Much appreciated. Have a great Christmas.
Thank you, Jez. A real pleasure. Lovely talking to you.